How many people believe in God? It's a simple question, but with a complex answer, because God means different things depending on who you ask and how you ask it as well. According to a 2022 poll by the U.S. analytics company Gallup, 81% of Americans answer yes when asked directly, "Do you believe in God?" However, past polls have shown that whenever there are more options available, that seemingly steadfast belief drops. For example, a 2017 poll gave 5 options, enabling takers to choose whether they were convinced that God exists, whether they thought God probably exists but with a little doubt, God probably exists but with a lot of doubt, God probably doesn't exist but they're not sure, or whether they were convinced that God does not exist. Under those conditions, the percentage choosing the first option, convinced that God exists, came in lower at 64%. And again, that was in 2017. Almost all studies show that belief in God in general has continuously fallen in recent years, so those numbers would likely drop further today. And of course, if the same questions were asked in different countries or on a global scale, then the results would almost certainly be significantly different again. In America, the majority religion is Christianity, a monotheistic system with the one God at the top of it. But in China, the most populous nation in the world, the majority of people subscribe to traditional Chinese folk religion or are atheist. In India, the second most populous nation on earth, the majority religion is Hinduism, a polytheistic system with multiple gods to follow. Clearly, the question, "Do you believe in God?" doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. However, and with a monotheistic figure especially, there are some seemingly fundamental debates as to whether or not God exists. For one, is God really good? We took a closer look at this in another video, and that episode follows this one, so be sure to stick around. But for now, the other big sticking point is, who created God? In most monotheistic traditions, God created the universe. At first, there was nothing and then there was something, all thanks to God. But if God was around to make all of this possible, then who or what made God possible? This seeming paradox is known as the problem of the creator God. And for those who use it to question or deny God, it then ultimately leads us into another problem known as an infinite regress. This is a situation in which a series of circumstances are directly linked and governed by whatever comes before and after, continuing on and on forever. So, if God created the universe, then what created God? If X created God, then what created X? If Y created X, then what created Y? There are other examples of infinite regress in practice, such as Aristotle's paradox of place, which says that if everything has a place, then all of those places have a place too, which then also have a place, and so on and so on. It's how you may have imagined your address as a child. You might have said that you lived in the universe, then the galaxy, then the solar system, then Earth, then your country, your city, neighborhood, road, your bedroom, etc. It's also something like seeing yourself reflected in 2 mirrors positioned opposite one another. The image of your face goes on and on and on. But taking it back to the problem of God, and while many atheists and philosophers don't buy it, those who believe in God also say that the counter-argument is quite simple. God is what's known as the first cause. This again links back to the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, who mused that eventually there must be what he termed an unmoved mover. This is something that affects something else but is not affected by anything itself. For believers, with regard to the universe and everything that's in it, this is God. God is the unmoved mover, the first or primary cause, responsible for everything but the result of nothing. For those arguing against the existence of God, this is often received as something of a cop-out. God as the first cause doubles up as saying God just is. But why and how could that be, they ask? Aristotle seemingly delivered an answer to some degree, further suggesting that an unmoved mover, in this case God, would have to exist in some kind of void, outside of time, space, and place. From there, it's a relatively easy jump to the ethereal, all-permeating presence that many view God to be. In general, many theists argue that to try to impose universal laws onto God, i.e. to suggest that God must be created because everything else is redundant from the outset. God made the laws of the universe, but is not and never has been limited by those laws. Perhaps this can be viewed in the same way as a video game developer is never held to the rules that they create inside the game. They exist on a higher plane, as does God in relation to the universe. And on that higher plane, even the concept of creation perhaps just isn't needed. Then again, some religions just sidestep the problem entirely. In Buddhism, for example, there is no creator God. Most Buddhist figures are not quite so far removed from humankind. They're more like higher, exalted versions of us. Examples to follow, but examples that are still guided by the same or similar physical realities. That said, there are aspects of and versions of Buddhism that do rely heavily on there being transcendence to higher planes. But for those who break out of the circle of life and death to reach nirvana, it's something that should come to be known. This is never really the case in most monotheistic religions. While some believe that you might enter heaven in the afterlife and perhaps even exist alongside God, there is always an unshakable hierarchy that God is at the top of. Part of faith is accepting that. But what's your verdict? Clearly, this is a question that could be answered in a number of ways. At its core is the belief or doubt that if God created everything, then doesn't something need to have existed beforehand to create the creator? And then something before that to create the creator-creator? The resulting infinite regress is the ultimate cosmic rabbit hole, and it's easy to get lost in. However, the counter-argument says that actually, trying to imagine God in this way is pointless. God made the rules that we're trying to get them to fit in with, but God really exists beyond those rules. If the universe is a melting pot, then God is simply the one that's stirring it. It's a debate that quickly gives rise to various other fundamental questions, however, because in most representations of God, they're shown to be all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful, and always good. So if the universe were a melting pot, then all that's inside it should work flawlessly. And yet, just on our tiny world, planet Earth, we see time and time again that that seemingly isn't the case. Bad things happen over and over and over again, so what gives? Does God just sometimes get the ingredients wrong? Perhaps, but then they wouldn't be all-knowing. Does God just sometimes lose control of their creation? Maybe, but then they wouldn't be all-powerful. We take a closer look at this and more in the next episode that follows directly from this one, titled, What If God is Evil? So don't click off. Stick around and keep pondering the big questions.